So here we are, winter's here, and I want to talk about a very important topic that should be of concern to all of us. It's often seen as controversial, though it shouldn't be, and it's the issue of homelessness and homeless shelters. And I'm also going to share with you some experiences that I had in the past as a young person and also as a police officer attending homeless shelters during radio calls. So I grew up in a police family. My dad was a police officer for 30 years. All his friends were police officers, and my family members, my brothers, became police officers. So it's kind of ingrained in me. So a lot of the conversations that I've had, even as a young person, had to do with policing and current issues facing cities. So something I'm very thankful for is the fact that I was exposed to a lot of issues from a very young age. When we would go into the city, my dad would drive around with us brothers after dinner, wherever we were going, and he would show us different areas, high crime areas, and also a lot of the areas where there was a lot of homeless. Now, back then, and I'm talking 35 years ago at least, I don't remember any homeless encampments, and I don't even think there was a lot of homeless shelters back then the way there is now, and I don't think it was such a hot button topic in media. There was one area in particular we would drive around where there was all kinds of people by a duct in a building, waiting outside a duct in the cold, because every minute or two there would be a blast of hot air that would come from this building, and the folks who were outside who were freezing, that was kind of like a little bit of a reprieve for them. But the problem was, it was steam that came out, and with it being so cold, the steam would warm them up. They felt great, but they were wet, and they would get obviously very cold. I don't have to get into it, but some folks even passed away from this back in the day. I'm going to fast forward now to my first experience attending a homeless shelter as a police officer. So I'm probably 22 years ago, I'm thinking, when this happened. We received a radio call. There was a gentleman wanted on Canada-wide warrant and local warrants for assault, all kinds of different things. But this was an actual dangerous, violent person who was staying at a homeless shelter. And we were called in by the staff because some issues happened there in the past. So we attended. There was about 4 of us. This gentleman didn't know that we were there for him. It was probably 2, 3 in the morning. People were sleeping. That place was packed, and I mean packed. We couldn't even step over people because everybody was touching. We basically had to walk past people's heads. Everybody was sleeping on top of one another, on tables, underneath the tables, whatever the case was. And we went in, we knew who the gentleman was, we executed the warrant and such, and that was it. But something that stuck with me was how did this individual, who was so violent and known, how was it that somebody like that could be placed with everybody else, the general population, if I can use that term? How could that even happen? And there's a stigma out there, because I pay attention to media and talk show and comments, that most people in shelters are like that. But that's actually not the case. How was it that this person was able to be sleeping with dozens and dozens, hundreds of folks at the shelter who were there, who genuinely needed some respite, who needed to get out of the cold and a warm place to stay? Now, in no means am I saying that this person shouldn't be allowed in there at all. I would never say that. That person has a right as a human being, an individual, to use the shelters like everybody else. Now I'm going to show you a picture that I took a few years ago as a police officer in full uniform. This is under a bridge in Toronto. It's a very busy intersection. People will travel, thousands of people travel along this highway, this roadway every day, and never know what's taking place underneath. So I went down there because there was a radio call, again, in full uniform. And I got to say, I was actually welcomed with open arms. People were looking at me suspiciously, of course. Why wouldn't they? But I genuinely had some decent conversations with the folks that were staying there. I've also come in contact with dozens of individuals throughout the course of my career who were sleeping in bus shelters, under bridges, in forests, anywhere they can. Now, historically, many police services everywhere dealt with these issues the wrong way. Somebody be sleeping in a bank vestibule or a building lobby, and they would get a phone call. They're scaring the residents. This is a real nice place. This guy doesn't belong here. Police show up, kick him out. Doesn't matter how cold it is. Police kick this person out, and that was it. Absolutely the wrong way to deal with this. Now, something else that didn't quite exist when I was a young man, or at least I didn't hear about it, was homeless encampments. You see or hear about homeless encampments everywhere now, not just in the city, in parks, in forests, under the bridge. Some soccer fields have been turned into homeless encampments. There's also some hotels and such that are taking in homeless or dedicating certain areas of the hotel to homeless. Some people agree with that, some people don't. That's besides the point. Now, something else that surprised me was the amount of people that were using homeless shelters that actually should not have been there. And I don't mean they weren't welcome. Everybody has these rights. What I mean is they needed mental health support. They needed help with substance abuse. Being in a shelter or being dropped off at a shelter was not right for them at that moment. The fact is, there's people who've stayed in homeless shelters that have been assaulted, they've been robbed, they had their stuff stolen, they've come out with bed bugs brought in by somebody else from another apartment, whatever the case is. And assault also includes sexual assault. So something very important. Every homeless shelter employee that I've come across has been frustrated and gone out of their way above and beyond to make the stay as comfortable as they could for those people who need to use a shelter. They're frustrated as well. There could be a lack of resources, government funding, whatever the case is. That's a whole other issue, and I plan on getting into that as well. But they've gone above and beyond to try to make this better, and they are just as frustrated as everybody else. So what's the point of this video? Where am I going with this? The point is, if I was ever in this situation, I learned many years ago that I would probably not use a shelter, and I would find a place like an encampment where I could stay with like-minded individuals and fend for myself on my own. Maybe it would be a bus shelter, whatever the case is. But some of these individuals are better off on their own because of the experiences that they've had. I would trust myself more than I would trust the system. Not everything is black and white. And I'm thankful once again for the experiences that I've had in my personal life and my professional life to realize that it's not as easy as let's just round everybody up and put them in a gymnasium. Every single person out there might be struggling in their own way with mental health, with addiction, whatever the case. And you know what? Sometimes they're just struggling with sadness. When we see people struggling, we tend to put ourselves in their shoes, and we think that the answer, the way to deal with this, would be what would work for us if we were in those shoes. Just gonna go off topic again for a second. I make these videos and something comes to mind and I wanna talk about it and see if it ties in. I remember being a young man in Vancouver, being on a school trip. And we were around Maine and Hastings. I was exposed to a lot of homelessness and drug use back in the day. And I remember driving through with the teachers, and the teachers were trying to drill it into our head that somewhere out there, that person has a mother or father that is waiting for them, that is sad and looking for them. The reality is, something else I learned as a police officer, that's not always the case. We tend to think of ourselves and put ourselves in a situation of that homeless individual, but the fact is, not everybody grew up in a perfect family, whatever perfect family means, with a strong support base. Some people since birth have been abused by the system and taken through the system that never had their best interests in mind. So what's the point of this video? Maybe just trying to bring exposure to an issue and get you to think outside the box the way it was exposed to me when I was a young person, and I'm very thankful for that. If you're very regimented in your own life, you don't get out a lot. Maybe if you travel, you just hop on the train and go to work and come back, go to the grocery stores. So it's possible you will never be exposed to some of the issues that are happening all over the country. I mentioned that bridge where I walked underneath. Hundreds of thousands of people drive across that bridge every day, and they'll never be aware of what's happening underneath it. But you can't be mad at them for that. It's simply not on their radar. It's up to us to bring awareness to these issues through effective use of social media or other new and innovative ways. And on the same token, there's a lot of individuals who genuinely care and want to help. They just don't know how to go about it because they don't even know these problems exist. So if you have any thoughts, please leave a comment. As you may know, I'm also an Ontario Human Rights Commissioner, and there's folks that pay attention to the comments and pay attention to my posts, and I can also bring awareness to these issues in a way that perhaps you couldn't on your own. And I don't mean that in an egotistical way. I'm just happy to use this platform in that way if possible. Thank you very much. I know some of my videos sound more like rants, way to get things off my chest, and maybe I am just trying to get things off my chest, and there's nothing wrong with that. Thank you very much. Have a fantastic day. Be safe. Look after one another. And perhaps we will see you again.